It's been 3 years and more than 30,000 kilometers together with my Gixxer SF250. Hello gentlemen, I am Misham Faith and here's my full review on the Gixxer SF250. I have thought of doing this video a long time ago, but felt that I would gain some more experience riding the motorcycle and hence took this long. So let's start. This is a very good looking motorcycle, especially when you choose to look at it from the back and isometrically on either sides. The front of the motorcycle, especially when viewed from the top, though it's not that much appealing but still doesn't seem bad. Looks varies on multiple people's perspectives and one might like it but the other may not. But I personally think it's a beautifully designed motorcycle. When you first look at it, especially brand new, you will adore the premium feel that it offers. Be it the paint, the huge looking front forks, the sleek looking taillights, the exhaust, the integration of the fairing, and the actual compactness that this motorcycle holds. Once you swing a leg on it and take it off the side stand, you will notice the solidness and feel the frame rigidity that it offers. And now you crank and start the motorcycle and feel a mix of thoughts which I'll cover in this video as well. Let's now speak about the hardware, moving from the front to rear. The front tires are from MRF, the RevZ C2 pair, which I have currently replaced with Michelin's Piled Streets with a 110mm section width, resting on a 17-inch machined spoke alloy rims, which looks fantastic. We also have a 300mm disc brake rotor and a 2-piston bi-brake caliper clamping on it. The front brakes are very good and are feedback rich on the levers. The brake hoses are not braided metal and are normal ones. This brake system uses a .4 fluid as a pressure transfer medium. The motorcycle is equipped with dual channel ABS as standard and is well calibrated for the front and is decent with the rear wheel. Moving upwards, we have the thick looking 41mm right side up non-adjustable forks which are pleasantly tuned for highways and slightly bad roads. Overall, the damping being slightly stiff, the feedback through the clip-on handles are simply great. Though there is some nosedive under hard braking, the setup is really good for highways as well as corners. Further on top, we have the most purposeful headlight on the segment, similar or slightly lesser than that of the Dominar. Made by FIAM, the headlight spread and the throw are excellent with thorough uniformity throughout the pathway. But since the color temperature lies in the colder side, it is not useful under misty conditions and are not that usable during rain because the road becomes pitch black and there is no reflection happening. But still you can see the road markings and information notes on the sides. We also have the negative instrument cluster for this particular old model, and the newer ones which you might end up with will have a slightly larger and much more info-rich display than this particular iteration, that is. We get 2 trip meters, a battery voltmeter and a clock. That's it. No fuel economy or average fuel mileage information are provided in this model here. I don't have any complaints regarding the legibility of display because it's very clear in any lighting. The clip-on handles are perfectly positioned, not too aggressive or relaxed, but provides a perfect blend in between. You could ride for at least 100 km before getting tired in your palms. The ignition switch is a standard switch and lock key mechanism, but the problem is the wires are exposed, so theft of this motorcycle shouldn't be any easier. Also, there is no immobilizer implemented here. Hope Suzuki redesigns the switch wiring in the next model type. Following behind, we have the fuel tank enclosure with the fuel tank holding about 12 liters of fuel at maximum. Even though it could have been larger, I don't consider it as a deal breaker. Below, we have the very flexible halogen turn signals. Though I wish for an LED setup, but it's pretty bright and doesn't bother me at all, so no complaints there. And now coming down to the heart of the motorcycle, it's a 249cc oil-cooled single cylinder with a SOHC setup with a 4-valve head. The engine puts out about 26.5 HP at about 9300 rpm and 22.2 Nm of torque at about 7300 rpm at the crank for this particular BS6 model. The engine is purely oil cooled, that doesn't even have cooling fins on the outer side of the cylinder or head, but it has an oil cooling radiator with an integrated fan. Performance wise, the engine's power delivery is very linear and pulls steadily from about 3200 rpm with ample torque up to 8500 rpm. There's a slight increment in power from about 6500 rpm, but it's nothing catchy. The engine has a slight buzz to it throughout the rev range and is well pronounced in some engine speeds, of which is annoying sometimes. For instance, for the default sprockets, the engine feels smooth at about 4000 rpm in 6th gear, and you'll be doing around 60 km per hour at that speed in the stock sprocketing. Then you bring your engine speed up to about 5200 rpm to do an 80 km per hour, but the vibrations are worse and tingly in your palms. After which you move upwards of about 6900 rpm to do a 100 km per hour, and the vibrations are reduced. So it's a weird engine in that aspect. I think there is still room for improvement with the dynamic balancing of the engine. Other than that, the engine is a real beauty. Be it acceleration or efficiency, it has it all. The maximum fuel mileage can be obtained by maintaining continuous cruising speed of about 55 to 65 km at 6th gear and with no abrupt acceleration. My personal highest efficiency number was about 41 km per liter with a standard 87 to 91 octane fuel. I don't suggest using a super premium or 97 octane fuel because when once I tried, the performance felt very sloppy and the acceleration was not that great. Now coming to the gearbox and clutch, this engine comes mated with a 6-speed gearbox with a standard wet multiplate clutch. The gear ratios are perfectly synchronized with the torque curve of the engine. There is torque and acceleration in any gear you choose to use. The problem here is that the top speed I feel is limited by the shorter gear ratios implemented here. At least they could have made the 6th gear smaller for a higher top speed at a lower RPM. This could also be providing a positive result in efficiency standpoint when cruising. In stock sprockets, flat out at the red line, the motorcycle will do 155 km per hour in the speedometer. The shift lever is pretty firm to operate and the gear engagement is very rough as well. You will hear a clunk every time you shift from neutral to first. It simply feels like the gearbox of an old sports bike. The clutch springs are stiff and hence the clutch, but the play is slightly lesser than the other motorcycles I've tried. Once again, I wish it had a slip and assist clutch, but then I don't consider a necessity for such a motorcycle unless of extreme downshifts and lighter lever feel. Now moving upwards towards the rear, we have a decently padded rider seat and a stepped pillion seat. Taking a pillion of a lighter weight is fine for shorter rides. Also, you lose part of the control of your motorcycle when having a pillion aboard. And then comes the wrist pain and the load associated to the passenger leaning on you. So this motorcycle is best designed to be driven solo. Coming further down, we have very stiffly sprung rear suspension with preload adjustability. The ride quality over bad roads, especially without a pillion from the rear end, is pretty bad due to the stiff setup. But while accelerating, there is no flex in springs, and for handling it's very good. You can decrease the preload to an extent and make it slightly comfier, but that requires a special large tool because of the continuous load on the spring. Beyond, we have a large 150 section tire from MRF as well, which I have replaced with Michelin Pilot Street once again, and the grip is pretty good. The rear brakes are of 220mm and are not that useful because the center of gravity on this motorcycle is so much forward focused that the rear is very light, which makes the rear tire skid even under slightly heavier load on the brake pedal, and the ABS kicks in, causing a pulsating effect, thereby totally ruining the braking experience. I personally think the braking force applied by the rider on this motorcycle must be 80 and 20% on the front and rear brakes respectively. The rear tire hugger is well designed by looks and is quite purposeful. The rear brake lights and the tail section of this motorcycle looks gorgeous even without a tail tidy. The general drivability of this motorcycle is very good and can be driven daily even in traffic conditions. You do not feel any heat from the engine even while moving at about 15 to 20 km per hour. The cooling fan of the oil cooler only kicks on during extreme heat, that is under heavy crawling traffic condition, and has turned on my motorcycle only thrice. You do experience some heat during the fan running on your left ankle and feet, but it rarely happens. Now coming to the maintenance and reliability of this motorcycle is quite cheap to maintain in terms of regular service. The engine takes only around 1.3 liters of engine oil for regular services, and the filter costs are pretty cheap. You can check out my detailed engine oil change video of this motorcycle for a clear idea. I had to change the brake pads at about 12,000 kilometers and has costed around 750 rupees for a new one. You can also procure a cheap Nikavi brake pad for around 150 rupees in Amazon, but the gripping area and the effectiveness of braking is slightly lesser than stock. I have mentioned the part names in description for your reference. The recommended engine oil grade is 10W40, but I personally use 10W50 for a slightly added smoothness throughout the revolution range. Now to the up-to-date cons that I have faced in this motorcycle. First, during idle, there is a prominent clutch clatter noise heard from the clutch enclosure with the friction plates engaged. This is common with all 250 engine models, which was so annoying during idle right from about 2000 kilometers of initial ride that I have physically opened the clutch cover and checked tightness of the pressure plates and springs. It is not a deal breaker, but I had to say. Second, in the first 6000 kilometers of ride, I have noticed oil seepage from the engine head cover gasket, for which I had to reseal the whole thing with RTV silicone. Now there is no leak issue with the oil leakage. My first pair of brake pads has worn under 12,000 kilometers, which is quite early considering I am not an aggressive rider. I personally opted for Nikavi brake pads, which was available at a cheaper price, which lasts slightly long, but the stopping bar is reduced a bit. Therefore, I don't recommend you doing it unless you know what you're doing. My cone bearings are worn within a period of 25,000 kilometers and I had to replace it. This time period is quite early considering the difficulty in service associated with it. The spark plugs had to be replaced twice during the 25,000 kilometers, which I consider is quite normal, and the spares are pretty cheap. You can go with iridium if required to extend the lifespan, but I don't consider it's worth the premium it demands. When driving at a speed at 6th gear, then coming to a complete halt immediately, you cannot downshift continuously by holding the clutch in a single go. One has to constantly load and unload the gears, otherwise the vehicle won't downshift and will do a free play, causing frustration under anxious and emergency conditions. I personally have experienced the same in a few other motorcycles as well, and it needs correction. The horn supplied with the motorcycle is loud, but it's very high pitched, which doesn't sound good. I personally have replaced it with Hellas S95 pair for a dual tone clean sound. Though the efficiency of the motorcycle when riding in the economy range is very good, when riding it above speeds of more than 110 km is pathetic. My lowest possible mileage driving constantly at about 120 km per hour was around 26 km per liter, which is significantly lower than the eco range, and that's the reason for me wishing for a taller 6th gear. In future, I'm planning on modifying the front sprocket to a 14 teeth and the rear to a 35 teeth for an increased top speed, and is yet to find how it will translate. Now coming to the conclusion, this now is an overall good quarter liter package with good style, decent performance, good efficiency and sufficient comfort, and is also quite enjoyable to ride. When compared to the Duke 250, Extreme 250, Domina 250, this motorcycle might seem a little underpowered, but practically speaking it's a decent bet at the price at which it is offered. Thank you so much for watching.